In the next few minutes, you'll understand why most men are ignored, and why a select few, even those who aren't the most handsome or the richest, become emotional addicts. This isn't a video about cliches. It's a surgical dissection of the invisible power that governs every conversation between you and a woman. While many chase the right words to be loved, you'll learn to transform each word into a strategic weapon. Machiavelli would call this reality-driven politics, the psychological mastery that makes the other feel without you having to say a single word. Has it ever happened to you? Starting a perfect conversation and suddenly feeling like she's lost interest without understanding why. It wasn't your clothes, it wasn't your appearance, it was your energy. An imperceptible mistake that her instincts detected in seconds. It's the look that wavers, the tone that changes, the intention that gives way. The politics of emotional power are relentless. Those who seek approval put themselves down, and those who understand this lead. What you'll discover today is the psychological game Machiavelli would have taught had he lived in the age of social media. A game that doesn't require manipulation, but calculated presence. You'll learn how to transform tension into desire, silence into dominance, and even a test into opportunity. Because in the end, respect isn't earned with promises. It's imposed with structure. Most men are ignored, not for lack of beauty or intelligence, but for something much more subtle, a lack of psychological magnetism. They enter a room trying to prove their worth, flaunting status, rehearsed words, and calculated smiles, but they forget the essential. Power lies not in what you show, but in what you make others feel. Machiavelli would call this a politics guided by reality, not ideals. It's the silent dominance, the virtue that doesn't need to be advertised. While some collect likes and validations, the rare learn to become a presence. And presence is when you say little, but each word creates tension, curiosity, and respect. It's when your gaze communicates authority without needing to raise your voice. It's this invisible and irresistible field that separates ordinary men from natural strategists. See, there are men who go unnoticed despite being attractive, while others, seemingly ordinary, effortlessly attract attention. What changes? The appearance of virtue is only superficial. True power arises from the perception of structure, from calm under pressure, emotional control, and the ability to provoke reactions without becoming upset. Machiavelli would say that the end justifies the means, and the most powerful means is mastery over emotions. When you control what you feel, you control the pace of interaction. The modern world calls this charisma. Machiavelli would call it virtù applied to social life. The man who understands this doesn't seek to be loved. He simply avoids being hated and allows admiration to come as an inevitable consequence of his inner strength. If you want to stop being ignored, subscribe to the channel now so you don't miss a single strategy. But the curious thing is that this invisible power isn't something you flaunt. It's something you breathe. It's in the tone of your voice, the timing of your pauses, the way you occupy the silence without anxiety. It's built on the calculated use of force, a minimal gesture, a precise word, a look that interrupts the other person's flow of thought. When you master this, you discover that the real game was never about convincing, but about creating an impact. People don't remember what you said, they remember what they felt. And while most talk too much trying to be heard, the strategist says little, but it's impossible to forget him. This is the threshold between appearance and power, and it's here that every invisible negotiation begins, which Machiavelli understood better than anyone. Every conversation, no matter how harmless it may seem, is a silent negotiation of power. While one person speaks, the other measures the playing field. Who leads the way, who reacts, who validates. It's a psychological battleground, not of words, but of presence. Machiavelli understood that he who seeks approval has already lost before he begins. The man who enters a conversation trying to be liked immediately surrenders control. It's like a king asking permission to sit on his own throne. Attraction, like leadership, isn't logical. It's hierarchical. It's not born of praise, but of tension. And this tension isn't aggression, it's structure. It's the magnetism of someone who knows they need nothing. When you speak without expecting a response, when you listen without rushing, you create emotional gravitas. The other person begins to orbit your rhythm, not the other way around. The psychology of seduction is the politics of the unconscious. Machiavelli would be the first to say that power is not what you declare, but what the other person assumes you have. This is why the man who tries to please loses respect. He shows he fears losing the other person, and fear is the perfume of submission. The wise man, on the other hand, applies the principle of virtù and fortuna. He prepares to navigate chance and acts according to real human nature, not romantic idealism. Instead of seeking approval, he observes. Every reaction, every micro-expression is a vote of confidence or disinterest, and he decides what to reinforce. He understands that power comes not from being loved, but from avoiding being hated while remaining enigmatic. This makes him desirable, because no one masters what they do not fully understand. Seduction, whether in politics, business, or love, is always a struggle for emotional narrative. Whoever leads the frame dominates the game. When a man speaks to a woman or to anyone, there's an invisible force determining who's reacting to whom. The secret is simple: don't rush to fill the silence. With each pause, the other person's brain tries to interpret what you meant, and it's in this space that influence is born. Tension is the ingredient that awakens desire, respect, and curiosity. Affection wins affection. Tension creates fascination. And while most try to win with a smile, the true strategist wins by controlling the emotional field, like a general who wins before the war even begins. And it's precisely here that the subtlest game begins, the inner mastery that precedes all external conquest. The difference between a man who inspires respect and one who craves attention is simply one: internal structure. The former builds power from the inside out, the latter tries to import it from the outside in. Machiavelli would say that the needy man is a prisoner of the politics of ideals. He wants to be loved, he wants to be validated, he wants to appear virtuous. The centered man, on the other hand, operates under a politics guided by reality. He understands that the world doesn't reward intentions, but perceptions. He doesn't say, "Accept me." He communicates, "I've already accepted myself." This self-sufficiency is evident even in silence. He speaks less, but every gesture has purpose. He doesn't try to be interesting. He is interesting because he doesn't need to prove anything. Power arises when you stop asking for permission to exist. Silence, for those who understand strategy, is more dangerous than 1,000 words. It creates discomfort, and discomfort breeds curiosity, and curiosity is the beginning of any form of fascination. Machiavelli saw it as a tool of domination, the calculated use of force. Sometimes saying less is demonstrating more. The pause between one sentence and the next can be worth more than an entire speech if delivered with presence. Try this in a conversation. Instead of responding immediately, look, breathe, and wait. You'll see the other person try to fill the void, and in doing so, surrender emotional control. It's the same logic used by leaders, negotiators, and seducers. Whoever controls the pace controls the field. It's virtù in action, mastering oneself before dominating the environment. Unpredictability is the antidote to indifference. Predictable people are forgotten. Unpredictable ones are remembered, talked about, feared. Respect is born when you break emotional patterns, when you're expected to react and you don't, when you're expected to smile and you just observe. Machiavelli would call this a decision based on true human nature. Human beings value what defies their expectations. Therefore, the centered person doesn't try to be consistent. He is strategically fluid, adaptable, master of his own mystery. He understands that emotional power is like water. It changes shape, but never loses its depth. And when the world tries to decipher him, he just smiles, because he knows that respect is born from what remains inexplicable. True power begins where haste ends. The dominant man is not the one who speaks the loudest. It is the one who remains calm when everyone else loses control. Machiavelli would say that virtue is revealed in the midst of chaos, not in calm. It is then that one sees who governs and who merely reacts. The dominant structure is born of inner certainty. You don't need to prove authority when you feel it pulsing within you. It appears in micro-decisions, in the times you choose silence over explanation, pause over defense, a firm gaze over justification. Each of these gestures communicates an ancient message. I am the center of my own empire, and this energy is perceived even before it is understood. Power is built in the invisible. When you stop justifying yourself, you teach others to stop doubting. When you disagree calmly, you convey the message that you don't need to win the debate, because you've already won the game of self-confidence. Machiavelli called this avoiding being hated without becoming weak, knowing when to act and when to let silence do the work. It's the calculated use of force applied to communication. It's not arrogance, but inner mastery. People confuse calm with weakness, but calm is the most advanced form of control. It is the terrain where power flourishes, because only those who master themselves can dominate the stage. The dominant structure doesn't need to be built with muscle or money, but with unwavering emotional energy. It's what transforms "I don't know what's wrong with him" into fascination. The man who has learned not to over-explain becomes a natural authority figure, and authority at its core is just the perception that you know something others haven't yet grasped. When you remain centered in the face of provocation, when you laugh off criticism, when you act clearly amid doubt, you become impenetrable. And it is in this instant that magnetism emerges, the silent respect that cannot be demanded, only felt. Because, as Machiavelli said, you don't debate to win, you assert to consolidate yourself. And it is precisely this silent consolidation that shapes the next stage of invisible power, emotional framing. Machiavelli said that real power is not declared, it is assumed, and this applies more to conversations than to thrones. The invisible frame is the emotional field in which the game unfolds without the other noticing. Whoever dominates the frame doesn't need to impose themselves. They simply adjust the environment to their presence. It is the man who sets the pace, not the one who reacts to it. He understands that reality-driven politics applies to everyday interactions. Every human exchange is a struggle for narrative control. The modern prince doesn't shout, doesn't demand. He simply is, and this serenity confounds those who live in anxiety. It is the most sophisticated form of power because it forces the other to play on their field, by their rules, under their emotional atmosphere. The practical techniques of this framework are subtle but devastating when mastered. The first, don't react to sarcasm. Every provocation is a test of your structure, and those who respond with anger confirm weakness. The second, don't engage in jealousy games. Jealousy is the emotional theater of those who need validation. The strategist, on the other hand, transforms these games into silence, and silence makes the other person see themselves in the mirror. The third, respond emotion with emotion, Never logic with logic. When someone attacks you with irony, respond with a smile or a pause. This disarms because the other person's brain expects resistance and you betray mystery. This is the calculated use of force, employing energy only when it serves your emotional dominance. Machiavelli knew that whoever controls perception controls reality. Therefore, the wise man doesn't argue about content. He shapes the context. He doesn't try to win the conversation. He defines its meaning. This is the secret of great leaders, irresistible negotiators, and natural seducers. The emotional frame always defeats the intellectual. You may be right, but if you're in the wrong frame, you'll lose respect. Power comes from posture, not logic. This is why the truly dominant man acts as if the world were at his pace, and the world somehow obeys. The conversation then ceases to be a field of tension and becomes a stage. And what follows is mastery over speech, gestures, and timing. The Machiavellian theater of conversation. Every word is a tool, but in the hands of those who understand Machiavellian psychology, every silence becomes a weapon. Machiavelli knew that ruling hearts was more complex than governing cities, and that the most effective power is that which remains unannounced. The first principle is strategic mystery, creating doubt and curiosity. Leave space for the unconscious to fill. When you reveal all of yourself, you kill fascination. The secret is not lying, but precisely omitting. Speak 70% of what you think, but keep the rest to yourself. This is how kings, leaders, and seducers maintain dominance, by not allowing the other person to know exactly where they stand. Curiosity is the fuel of attraction, and mystery is the oxygen that keeps it burning. The second weapon is narrative direction. In every conversation, someone leads and someone follows. Most adapt to the other's pace. The strategist does the opposite. They set the emotional pace of the interaction. If the other speaks fast, they slow down. If the other tries to control, they step back and observe. This contrast creates influence. It's the same principle used by elite negotiators. Whoever sets the pace sets the narrative. The third weapon is inverted focus, making the other seek your approval. Ask questions that force the person to reveal themselves. What attracts you to someone? Sounds simple, but it forces their unconscious to position itself. As they respond, they're already adjusting to your presence. Machiavelli would call this a decision based on true human nature, making the other move without realizing they're being led. The fourth weapon is silence and omission. What you don't say speaks louder than any argument. A simple look or pause can make someone question their thoughts about you, and that questioning creates a bond. Then comes calm under pressure. Every emotional test someone launches is an attempt to understand whether you are solid or volatile. When you remain stable, you communicate strength. When you react, you surrender the throne. The calculated use of force is this: resisting the need to prove something. Power, in the end, isn't about saying more. It's about making more felt with less. And when these weapons are used together, the conversation ceases to be a dialogue and becomes an invisible spectacle. The Machiavellian theater of conversation. Conversation for the common man is merely an exchange of words. For the strategist, it is emotional theater. Machiavelli understood this like few others. Life is a stage, and those who control perception control reality. This is why the men who win the most are not the most handsome, but those who master the psychological framing of the moment. They know that each interaction is a performance where energy is the invisible script. They speak with pauses, look with presence, gesture with purpose. Every detail is calculated, not artificially, but like a conductor who understands the rhythm of the orchestra. He does not improvise with anxiety, he composes with intention. This is the essence of virtù and fortuna. knowing how to use emotional chants to your advantage, shaping the chaos of conversation as an artist molds clay. The Machiavellian theater of conversation isn't manipulation, it's awareness. It's understanding that emotion is the currency of power. The man who speaks without emotion is forgotten. The one who feels too much loses control. Balance is the art. Therefore, the true strategist practices strategic detachment, being willing to lose the interaction without losing focus. When he realizes he's being tested, he smiles. When provoked, he changes his tone, not his intention. This is disconcerting, because the world is accustomed to reactions, not control. Machiavelli would call this a calculated use of force, acting when the impact is inevitable and retreating when victory is silence. This is why the man who masters the theater of conversation doesn't fight for the stage, he creates it. See, every great leader from Caesar to Steve Jobs understood the value of emotional performance. They didn't just speak, they embodied their ideas. And that's what modern man needs to recapture, the art of acting without falsehood. The woman, the client, the adversary, they all react to the energy you emanate, not the logic you offer. Machiavellian theater is this subtle dance between vulnerability and power, between presence and mystery. When you act with this awareness, the other person feels they're facing something rare, and respect arises as a natural consequence. It's at this point that the stage transforms into a battlefield, and every gesture, every pause, every retreat becomes a strategic move. The next step, learning the weapons of invisible counterattack. Every time someone tests you, they're not trying to destroy you. They're trying to understand how far they can go. It's the instinct of true human nature. The unconscious always seeks the limit. And the person who loses center in the face of a test also loses respect. Machiavelli called this virtue the ability to remain unshaken in the face of provocation. The invisible counterattack arises precisely from this, from the art of reacting without reacting. Calculated humor, for example, is a lethal weapon. When someone tries to provoke you and you respond with a slight smile and a phrase like, "No, not always, sometimes I'm worse," you break the emotional pattern and reverse the tide. Lightness is more disarming than pride. Strength lies in not taking yourself so seriously that you need to prove something. Another powerful weapon is the mirror question. When someone confronts you, return the tension with neutrality. If someone says, "Are you always this calm?" respond, "Why does it bother you?" Without irony, just with genuine curiosity. This reversal makes the other justify themselves, revealing their own insecurity. It's what Machiavelli would call a calculated use of psychological force, pushing the opponent back into their own mind. The third tactic is role reversal. Make the other explain themselves as if observing an experiment in progress. And if the game gets intense, remember conscious non-response. Sometimes a 2-second pause is worth more than a 10-minute defense. Silence, when intentional, turns the aggressor into a spectator of their own weakness. But there's an even more sophisticated weapon, strategic withdrawal. Exiting at the peak is a form of silent victory. When you end the conversation at the point where the other person still wants more, you create emotional scarcity. It's the same principle used by charismatic leaders and historical seducers, leaving the other person hungry for meaning. Machiavelli said, "Men forget the death of their father, but not the loss of power." When you withdraw at the right moment, you take away the other person's power and preserve their mystery. This is the difference between dominating and defending yourself. A true strategist doesn't win by arguing. They win by disappearing at the right moment. And it's in this trail of absence that the most dangerous phenomenon in social psychology is born: obsession. Obsession isn't born of presence, it's born of absence. Human beings cling to what they don't fully understand. Machiavelli understood that the unfinished is a form of power because the unconscious hates gaps. When you say everything, you free the other. When you leave open questions, you keep them trapped in your image. This is the basis of emotional suspense. Tell, but don't conclude. Show interest, but withdraw before the obvious. It's the art of emotional scarcity, and it creates more desire than any display of affection. When the other doesn't know where to place you, they think of you. When they think of you, they seek you. And when they seek you, you've already won. Power lies in the space between what you reveal and what you leave implicit. Machiavelli would say that the combination of firmness and mystery is both the poison and the antidote to attraction. Internal contrast is what nourishes the bond. Be gentle but not submissive, attentive but unavailable. Show warmth but maintain distance. The human mind becomes addicted to this pendulum movement between closeness and uncertainty. This is how the strategist creates emotional investment. They don't offer everything at once. They understand that each small dose of attention is a seed of curiosity planted in the other's unconscious. The mistake of the weak is to believe that to conquer is to give. The strong know that to conquer is to retain. It's the same principle as virtù and fortuna. Master chance, let the other miss it, and fill with imagination what you strategically omitted. But the apex of the obsession code lies in a paradox, letting go of the desire to be understood. When you try to be understood, you become predictable. When you accept being an enigma, you become unforgettable. Power isn't about being present, it's about being remembered when you're not. And this applies to all areas of life, in relationships, in business, in leadership. The person who understands the symbolic value of mystery doesn't manipulate, they inspire. Because while the ordinary person tries to convince, the strategist provokes reflection. The other person doesn't understand exactly what they felt, but they want to feel it again. And this is how the cycle of obsession is born. The desire to relive the impact you made without even needing to be there. This is the prelude to the ultimate truth, silent power. The irresistible man doesn't need to be understood, it needs to be felt. Silent power is the final stage of virtù, when self-mastery transforms into natural magnetism. Machiavelli would say, this is the point where politics merges with the soul, when control ceases to be over others and becomes over one's own reactions. This is where energy speaks louder than words. The strategist doesn't rush, doesn't show off, doesn't compete. He simply is. What makes him unforgettable is precisely this serenity in a world that screams. The end justifies the means, and the means is the silence that commands respect without asking. When you master silence, you master the rhythm of the environment. And when you master the rhythm, the world begins, unconsciously, to dance to your beat. Silent power is not the absence of strength, it is refined strength. It doesn't demand validation, it doesn't seek to prove anything, it doesn't need to win debates. It lets time and presence do the work. Better to be feared than loved, said Machiavelli. But the true strategist understands that fear is born from the memory of strength, respect from the memory of calm. The power that endures is that which survives absence. Therefore, the man who becomes a narrative in motion is the one who doesn't need applause to exist. He is both the character and the author. And when he leaves traces, not of words, but of sensations. It is the echo of his presence that remains vibrating in the minds of others. In the end, real power is remembered when you're not there. It's the look that reappears in her mind when the room is empty, the tone of your voice echoing effortlessly. It's not what you say, it's what she can't forget after you're gone. This is the pinnacle of reality-driven politics, transforming emotion into memory. The man who arrives here doesn't compete, doesn't beg, doesn't shout. He leads emotionally because he has become the very axis of calm. His energy is self-sufficient, and that's what makes him irresistible. Machiavelli would call this loyal armies of one's own, mastery over impulses, reactions, and time. The game is over, but the impact remains, and those who feel it never see power the same way again. Knowledge without action is decadence. You can understand all of Machiavelli's laws, master the game of language and presence, but if you don't apply them, you'll be merely a spectator of power, not a player. Politics guided by reality does not forgive passivity. It demands movement, demands risk, demands virtue. The man who overthinks before acting ends up serving those who simply acted. The world is driven by those who transform theory into impulse. That's why Machiavelli said that fortune favors the bold, not the indecisive. The time to test everything you've learned is not when you feel ready, but when you realize that standing still is more costly. Silent power is not contemplation, it is decision. The end justifies the means, and the means now is to act. Apply the tactics, speak less, observe more, train silence as a sword, use humor as a shield. Master your gaze as a tool of reading, not seduction. Every conversation is a training ground, every encounter an arena of perception. Transform everyday life into a laboratory of influence. And remember, it's not about manipulation, but about deeply understanding human nature. Machiavelli never taught cruelty, he taught lucidity. The difference between a fool and a wise man is that the former reacts, the latter plans. And in the theater of life, those who don't write their own script end up being extras in someone else's. This is the greatest cruelty of the modern world. Those who don't master their own frame live within someone else's. Now, look around. How many opportunities have you missed by hesitating? How many times have you tried to be liked and been forgotten? The time has come to turn this around. The true strategist creates advantage amidst chaos. They don't wait for the perfect scenario, they craft it with calm and precision. Remember, real power is breathed, felt, and remembered. It's not in shouting, it's in presence. Not in controlling others, but in mastering yourself. And if you want to continue learning the art of dominating without dominating, of attracting without asking, of commanding without saying a word, subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications. Because what comes next isn't just knowledge, it's the transformation of instinct itself into strategy. If you understood what was said here, you know that power isn't in being the most handsome, the most talkative, or the richest. It's in mastering what others don't perceive, the invisible realm of emotions. Most still strive to be loved, while the few who understand Machiavelli become respected. The question is simple. Do you want to remain predictable, or do you want to become the one who is never forgotten? Every test, every silence, and every conversation you have from now on is a mirror. In them, you will see the reflection of the man who reacts, or the man who directs the game. Choose who you want to be, because respect isn't born from shouting. It's born from a firm gaze, a controlled pause, and an inner certainty that doesn't need validation. Silent power is learned, trained, and applied, and the more you master it, the more the world begins to bow to your presence. Now it's your turn. Apply what you learned today. Experiment with silence. Observe people's reactions when you stop trying to please. And when you notice the difference, when you notice that respect has started to come before words, come back here and tell us in the comments what changed. Subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications, because the next video will take this art to another level. And remember, the power game isn't played by those who talk the most, but by those who learn to keep quiet at the right time.